this corner, the 2004 Marvel Legends Juggernaut by Toy Biz. In this corner, the 2010 Juggernaut by Marvel Select. And in this corner, the 2016 Marvel Legends Juggernaut Build-A-Figure by Hasbro. And in this corner, the 2018 Marvel Legends 80 Years Juggernaut. To commemorate the channel crossing 7,500 subs, we're having an equally colossal versus. Welcome to 5 Points of Articulation, where I review action figures and then articulate 5 points to help you decide if you want to add that figure to your collection. The 5 points I discuss are packaging, presentation, posability, playability, and price. I'm Jason, and if you enjoy my content, please like, share, subscribe, do all the YouTube rigmarole. Starting off with the packaging, and I don't actually have the packaging for this one. Still, it was an old style Toy Biz clamshell, and we do know what those look like. I also don't have the packaging for Select, but we also know what those look like, right? It's pretty much just a giant blister card like this, but with Juggernaut stuff. Comic art on the side, and then on the back you get a product shot and a bio. I also don't have packaging for the Build-A-Figure, but in my defense it doesn't actually have packaging. I mean, not packaging of its own. As a Build-A-Figure, it was spread across multiple figures in boxes just like this. Granted, Sunfire here was a different wave, but they both came out in 2016 and looked just like this. Which is to say, more yellow than a Coldplay concert. The 80 years version at least does have its own unique window box. He's packed with Colossus, has that spiffy 80 years logo in the corner, comic art on the side, more comic art on the back, and a bio. The blister card style of Select or the clamshell style of the original Toy Biz Marvel Legends does have its charm, but unfortunately they're just one and done. The Build-A-Figure is more collector friendly insofar as they come in reusable collector boxes, but it only works if you keep him disassembled or disassemble him after each use. Out of all of them, this is the only truly collector friendly packaging, and also serves as a decent celebration of the characters therein. For packaging, this round goes to 80 years. Moving on to presentation, and Toy Biz stands at 7 3/4 inches, Select stands at a staggering 9 inches, and the two Hasbro figures stand at a similarly sizable 8 1/2. For those who are only familiar with Juggernaut thanks to X-Men or X-Men adjacent movies, he is not actually a mutant. He's actually empowered by a mystical ruby and is the avatar of a demon named Sidorak. And if the name Sidorak is familiar, it's because he's an enemy of Doctor Strange. In that regard, Juggernaut gave the X-Men one of its earliest connections to the Marvel Universe at large, but that's not Juggernaut's only important connection. One thing the movies have never acknowledged is that Juggernaut is none other than Professor Xavier's stepbrother. I've always been fascinated by the dichotomy of a character whose power comes from his intellect and a character whose power is nothing but raw, brutal strength. Truly a fascinating portrait I would love to see MCU X-Men movies explore. The source of Juggernaut's power is inside of his helmet, and each one has been realized differently. The Toy Biz helmet's relatively smooth, but does have some scuff paint on it to give it the illusion of wear and tear. It's also removable. This allows it to be used as a fun prop for action figure photography or displays, but I will say that it's very loose and constantly falling off. By contrast, the Marvel Select figure is cast as two separate pieces but glued together. There's also some great texture and painted detail that makes it really feel like a metal piece. The Hasbro Build-A-Figure has been approached similarly. Although two separate pieces, the helmet's not removable, it also has lots of cool dents and dings. I appreciate the chipped tooth and the smile underneath, gives them a lot of personality, but I've always been really bothered by just how unnaturally far apart the eyes are. The 80 years version has the exact same face without the pupils painted in, and now his teeth are pearly whites. Additionally, the helmet's been resculpted to look smooth and polished. As for why, that's to make it look more consistent with the rest of his body. The Build-A-Figure has a really well-textured helmet, but the rest of him is so smooth it doesn't really match. It also doesn't really make sense. At first I thought they were going to reuse Juggernaut to make the Incredible Hulk, but that's not the case. Adding more confusion to it, this Juggernaut's belt hides a belly button, which further suggests they were planning on using this torso for a shirtless character, but near as I can tell, they've never used this buck for anybody else. That belt, by the way, is very nicely textured and painted, and it's the only other sculpted difference between the two. Otherwise, the only difference in the 80 years version is the color scheme. And if the Hasbro one having a belly button was weird, the Toy Biz one has nipples. That's because the torso and arms share a base sculpt with the Toy Biz superposable Savage Hulk. It also has some nice armor around the shoulders, which has been scuffed up like the helmet, a darker color scheme more consistent with the Build-A-Figure, and some very unfortunate limbs. Almost like an ape, his arms are way too long. That said, they have been given a bit of texture and some paint to accent accent the veins. I love how this vein is literally pushing through the iron band. Again though, some nice scuffing on that. In terms of sculpted and painted detail, however, none of them can compete with Marvel Select. An amazing amount of texture and shading in the skin and metal, and his armor is like the hide of a rhino. Unlike most of the other figures that have at least a little bit of shading, this one is shaded throughout. It's also the only one that has treads underneath his gigantic boots. For presentation, this round easily goes to Select. Moving on to posability, and since these are essentially the same figures, I'm only going to be using one for this demonstration, specifically the BAF. As I stated earlier, the Toy Biz figure's helmet is removable. This means you can move Kane's head side to side, or up and down, which does create a bit of a problem. You could turn the helmet to accommodate, but it doesn't click into place. The other figures and heads move together as one single unit. Select is on a ball joint. It can move side to side, but not up or down. The two Hasbro figures are on ball joints and disc hinges. As such, they can look side to side, up this far, down this far, and they also get a bit of tilt. In terms of range, that's great, but it also makes the helmet look like it actually isn't attached to him. Toy Biz can raise his orangutan-like arm 90 degrees, as can Select, and also Hasbro. Toy Biz, however, has trap hinge joints that allow his arms to raise just a little bit more. All of our contenders have bicep swivel and single jointed elbows. Toy Biz can bend this deep, Select can bend this deep, and Hasbro can bend this deep. Unfortunately, Select has no upper arm or wrist articulation. Hasbro, of course, has swivel hinge wrists. Toy Biz, however, swivels here and hinges here. It also has articulated fingers and thumbs. Just realize that this knuckle walking pose really does not help my ape comparisons. Moving over to the middle though, and his torso articulation is very interesting. There's a dumbbell joint in this waist cut and slots that allow him to move forward, back, and side to side. Doesn't really give him any kind of hunch forward or back, but it does add range. Select, on the other hand, has a diaphragm joint very nicely hidden in the two sections of chest armor. He also doesn't really get any kind of meaningful forward and back, but he does get twist. The Hasbro figures have a simple ab crunch and waist swivel, which not surprisingly do offer the best range. They can arch back this far and hunch forward this far, and of course twist side to side. Below the belt, and all the figures have some form of hip ball, with Toy Biz of course being the most obvious and the most ugly. Even so, we can kick this high and spread this far, and that hip ball does serve the same function as a thigh cut. Select, surprisingly, has the same kick, but the split isn't anything to write home about. That said, thanks to texturing, the hip ball is better integrated. Out of all of them, Hasbro is probably the best hidden with muscles overlapping the balls. They also have the highest kick, and a split that, while not quite as good as Toy Biz, is still pretty impressive. One thing that Toy Biz can boast over the others, however, is double jointed knees. The bend for Select is honestly fairly comparable though, same as Hasbro. Moving all the way down, in the flat-footed Toy Biz Juggernaut's ankles can hinge and pivot. Select is a bit more complicated in that you can hinge one direction, spin, and then use that same hinge to pivot. The Hasbro figures have the best ankles of the group, but Toy Biz has toticulation. Going into this category, and the smart money was on Toy Biz. Between the fingers and toes and double jointed knees, he simply had more joints than any of the other figures, but more doesn't always equal better. The helmet does in turn with his head. The torso articulation doesn't really accomplish anything but just slide his chest around. The finger articulation is only there in substitute of fists, which would have been much better, and those double jointed knees aren't even demonstrably better than Select. Select, of course, has contractual limitations that define what articulation it can and can't have, but hey, at least he can turn his entire head. Even so, for posability, this round is a Hasbro draw. Moving on to playability, and in addition to a comic book, the Toy Biz Juggernaut comes with his diorama base. There's some really great dry brushing in there to bring out the texture of the stone. At a glance, you might think it's supposed to be maybe a jail cell, or maybe even a vault, but if you can read the sign, you'd see it's the gate to the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters. The hilarious part is that there's holes so you can hang it on a wall, as if it could support the weight of this thing, but even if it could, these pegs are set a little bit too far back for these peg holes. Neither Select nor the BAF have any accessories. Fortunately, 80 years more than makes up for that. In addition to these fists that Juggy comes pre-packed with, he also comes with a more gripping hand, an open hand, an alternate head that's clearly taken a couple of hits, and a smashed helmet. But playability is more than just accessories, it's also about how well your figure plays with others. And first things first, we have his stepbrother, Professor Xavier. Rightly so, Kane towers over him. Of course, this one gives off some very strong X-Men animated series energy. For the field leader of the X-Men, and here we have Cyclops. This is the Marvel Legends and Marvel Select version of him. I chose this style of Cyclops because the costumes match. Hopefully at some point Diamond will give us the 90s version. Next up, and here we have Storm. Once again, it's Legends and Select. Once again, I picked him for the matching costume. And once again, I'll say we're way behind on a 90s Select version. That said, for more familiar 90s style look, and here we have Wolverine. Even by Diamond standards, I always felt that theirs was a bit too big. Canonically, Wolverine is only supposed to be 5'3". Definitely a far cry from fan favorite Hugh Jackman. Moving on, and here we have Rogue. The Select Rogue is a new addition to my collection. The Marvel Legend is part of the Juggernaut wave. She was also my very first Hasbro Marvel Legend X-Men figure. Of course, where there's Rogue, Gambit can't be too far behind. The Marvel Legends version is from the Retro Card series. Similar to this Juggernaut, the original version had a darker color scheme. Once again though, this combination really puts me in mind of the X-Men animated series. For one last member of the team, here we have Colossus. The rivalry between these two is legendary. The Marvel Select version of Colossus might be a bit too big for the Marvel Legends version of Juggernaut. Luckily, the Marvel Legends version of Peter came packed with this one. Moving over to some villains, and here we have Magneto, the Master of Magnetism. I'm curious, what's your favorite Magneto figure? Sound off in the comments. If you're okay with a slightly smaller Juggernaut, I think this could work with Select. But once again, I'm really loving the animated series aesthetic. For one last X-Men comparison, and here we have Apocalypse. I am very excited for the Marvel Select version. The shinier version is the Build-A-Figure and is another recent addition to my collection. The purple version is the Retro Card and once again modeled on the animated series. For our usual relative scale comparison, here's Juggernaut with Pizza Spidey and the Spectacular Spider-Man. Well, of course, almost every comparison we've made has been between Marvel Legends and Select, so it hardly seems necessary, but what can I say? I'm a sucker for tradition. And speaking of tradition, here we have Stealth Iron Man. I'm gonna rip you in half now. I can't feel my legs. Oh, there they are. The great thing about larger-than-life characters like Juggernaut or Sabretooth is that you can slip the Select figures seamlessly into your Marvel Legends display. That being said, the 80 Years version is the only one with accessories and has a color scheme that works for both your comic book and animated series shelf. For playability, this round goes to 80 Years. That's how we do it in Mother Russia. This leaves us with nothing left to discuss but the price. If we were going by the original price, Toy Biz would win, hands down. But my goal with this video is to help current collectors figure out which is the best Juggernaut to add to their collection today. Loose, you can get the Toy Biz Juggernaut for about $40, and in box you can get him for about $65. Complete, you can usually get the BAF between $50 to $60. Loose, you can get the 80 Years version between $50 to $75, or new in box with Colossus for over $100. Marvel Select is slightly more complicated. You can usually find this guy loose pretty cheap, but that's because they are generally bootlegs. The good news is that even though this figure is almost 13 years old, you can still get him online new in box for between $30 to $40. For price, this round goes to Marvel Select, but the winner is 80 Years, 3-2 to 1-0. As for my personal preference, I still like Select the best, and he's going to continue to rampage through my display. If you like this video, check out one of these. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back again real soon, but until then, play nice and have fun.